Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, colleagues, friends, and partners, we're going to have a very important discussion today on financing the energy transition towards net zero. This is critical because financing and technologies are two of the most critical pillars of energy transition, not only in this region, but globally. We have a distinguished panel with us today. To start off with, Kishan Kode, Regional Team Leader for Nature, Climate, and Energy, UNDP Regional Hub for Arab States. We have with us Abdullah Jafri, Senior Manager, GCC Countries for International Finance Corporation. We have Dr. Fatih Yilmaz, a PhD, Fellow in the Climate and Sustainability Program of CAPSARC. We have Zoe Knight, Group Head, Center for Sustainable Finance and Head of Climate Change, MENA and Turkey, HSBC. And Dr. Majid Mahmoud, Technical Director, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. To start us off, may I please invite on lectern Kishan Kode from UNDP to deliver some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adil, and everyone, our partners, our audience, everyone online. It's a pleasure to have this one of our final Track 1 sessions at the MENA Climate Week on the important energy transition goal. So COP28 is coming up right after MENA Climate Week. It's an important gathering, a critical global gathering globally to address the issue of scaling up climate finance, decarbonizing development. And we've had great discussions all week long here at MENA Climate Week under Track 1, exactly on this topic. As we know from the discussions, the MENA region has seen a 25-fold increase of renewable energy capacity over the past decade. It's one of the faster growth rates globally. So some great success. And this is underpinned actually by innovative finance instruments and solutions, scaled up investment, not just by public, but by private. And importantly, the governance approaches, governance mechanisms to actually achieve this goal of de-risking scaled up finance and solutions and technology solutions. So from reducing import tariffs on renewable energy and other technologies to expanding the use of feed-in tariffs. From expanded public finance for renewable energy to reducing fossil fuel and electricity subsidies. From the expanded use of green bonds and concessional blended finance to the expanding use of debt for nature swaps, debt for climate swaps. We're seeing expansion of very specific instruments that are at the base of the success story that's emerging in the MENA region on expanding renewable energy finance. And this week is a great opportunity to really look at some of these success stories, look at some of the solutions that are emerging from both public and private partners, international institutions, as we have in our session today. But as we know, under the NDCs that are in focus at COP28, to implement the NDCs, the Arab region has $600 billion envisaged by the countries in their NDCs across the region. And the 2030 targets that the countries have come together for renewable energy expansion in the region, we're only today about 7% of the power mix in the Arab region is on renewable energy. So achieving the goal of 30% by 2030. So there's a lot more to be done in the coming years. NDC implementation will be dependent on these means of implementation, finance and technology in particular. So we're going to hear today from our distinguished panel about solutions that are rising, specific technology solutions, finance instruments. And as UNDP, we're happy to be partnering with countries across the region on many of these things. So we look forward to a great discussion today, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kishan. Let's get into the discussion right away. My name, again, is Syed Adil Abbas. I represent World Bank Climate Change MENA region. I think we have a very good balance of finance and technology on the panel today. And I'm going to start off with the financing and the private sector side of it, because as many of us have heard, public sector financing is not going to be sufficient for this energy transition, and private sector really needs to be engaged, and financing needs to be scaled up. So let me start with IFC. Abdullah, what's your sense of what is needed to scale up private sector financing for energy transition?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Adil, and good morning, everybody. For the benefit of those who are not familiar with the IFC, the International Finance Corporation is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and our role is to support the development of private sector markets in emerging economies. I think to answer your question, it's good to have an idea of the scale of investments that are needed. So the IFC, in collaboration with the International Energy Agency, have quantified how much investments are needed to help achieve net zero by 2030. So from a baseline of about $770 billion of investments into renewable energy in 2022, we need to more than triple that by 2030 to about $2.8 trillion. That's a steep increase in investments. But if you look at the details of that increase, the picture becomes even more challenging. So almost 2/3 of that $770 billion happened in one country, in China, which means that the big brunt of that increase will need to come in other markets at a steeper increase, given the lower baseline. The other challenge is when people talk about net zero and energy transition and energy efficiency, the thinking goes towards renewable energy resources and generation. But that's only 1/3 of that $2.8 billion. The remaining needs to go towards other usages, such as improving efficiency and improving the end user sectors, such as cooling, water desalination, and such heavy usage, heavy electricity usage industries. You need to invest more into grids and distribution, as well as carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So it's a nuanced picture. There's a lot that needs to be done, and you need to create the environment to help catalyze these investments. So what needs to be done? We see 4 fronts where close collaboration among different parties need to take place. The first is creating the enabling environment. But not also, and you do that through policy reforms, subsidy reforms, and creating the environment that will catalyze these investments. But you also need to strengthen the organizations that operate and organize these sectors. The second that needs to be done is increase the concessional financing available for these sectors. The estimate that IFC and International Energy Agency have for reaching that $2.8 trillion is that we need between $80 to $100 billion of concessioning financing every year to be able to catalyze that volume of investments. The third is we will need to accelerate the issuance and utilization of green financing instruments. So we've seen a huge increase in green bonds, but if you look at most of the issuance that are happening either in developed countries or, again, in the dominant market, which is in China, we need to accelerate the issuance of those instruments in other markets as well. But you need to go beyond green bonds. So we're looking at sustainability-linked bonds, where you tie the sustainability indicators of a firm to the coupon that they pay on that bond, which incentivizes them to invest into more efficiency and less greenhouse gas emissions. And last but not least, you need to deepen the capital markets in emerging markets, because that's how you bring in different classes of investors into the space. So I think this is the close collaboration on those four fronts would help catalyze more investments from the private sector.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. This was very clear and articulate. Massive financing needs. How do we meet them? Importance of enabling environment, which we'll talk about a little bit later with our UNDP panelists. Concessional financing, need to bring in enabling green financing from treasury markets and other sources as well. So thank you. Let's go to HSBC, purely the banking perspective. What do you think, what's your perspective of the readiness of the banking sector to be involved in the energy transitions?
So, excuse me, thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. It's a great panel discussion that we're having at this critical moment ahead of COP28. And so for what seems like a relatively simple question, banking readiness, what's the readiness of the banking sector to help? There's actually quite a lot of complication underneath that top level readiness question. So at the very high level, the financial sector is ready to deploy products and services in geographies to help with energy transition. Now, what I mean by that is we have the labeled products that colleagues can talk about to be able to drive transparency on how finance is being deployed, so the green aspect and the sustainability-linked aspect of funding. But where there are some gaps are around the specific rationale or the specific transition plan for industries and sectors. And what I mean by that is, when we think about the climate problem, we know very clearly at the global level that we have a carbon budget that we've got to stay within, and that means that the demand for fossil fuels needs to fall and the supply of low carbon alternatives needs to rise. And again, at the very sort of high level, that sounds straightforward. We know we've got renewables, we've got energy efficiency, we've got different processes that we can put in place. But once you drill down to the local level, you have country barriers and frameworks that maybe aren't as much of an enabler as the financial sector needs. And so what global organizations such as ourselves are trying to do is work really closely across our network of peers to work out a standardized way of thinking about transition planning for a bank and for the engagement that we need to do with industry and other sectors to understand their transition plans. And we need to build capacity in our own organizations. And that's happening. It's happening relatively quickly, but not fast enough. And of course, thinking about those local challenges means that we can knowledge share to problem solve faster on what works in certain regions and between others. And to give you a tangible example on this, when we think about the energy sector, we know that one of the most mission critical items to get emissions down is to substitute away from coal-fired power stations. And the majority of coal-fired power stations are found in Asia. I mean, not all, of course, they're throughout the world. But one of the areas that we can focus on the most is a substitution in Asia. Here in the Middle East, finance is thinking about how to finance a transition of the oil and gas sector here and how to get emissions down from an operational perspective. And that takes a different type of problem solving. But they're all related to complicated and difficult decisions around how the revenues from an industry are contributing to the underlying economy of that country. They're related to the jobs that are involved in the space, and they're related to how to really deliver that net zero economy that countries are putting forward into the UN process that COP28 will focus on. So in terms of banking readiness, there are many foundation stones in place for us to be able to accelerate the mobilization of capital into low carbon solutions. The main gaps are around capacity, local understanding of how a transition will really take place, and really understanding how to get emissions down in the fastest way possible from a additionality perspective.
Right. Thank you very much, Zoe. You've kind of summed up your remarks towards the end. I was going to underline, yes, there's an overall banking sector commitment to these transitions, but then there needs to be more sophisticated understanding of specific pathways in different sectors and at a local level so that there's a standardized understanding of how to move forward and how do we channel those products and services through the banking sector within that. Kishan, when I come to you, UNDP's perspective, perhaps examples of that, but Abdullah touched on enabling environment, Zoe touched on the need for that as well in terms of removing some of the barriers from enabling environment. from your perspective, the way you look at it from UNDP, how do you look at the enabling environment? What would it take to build it? And if there are specific examples that you can share with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, UN Development Program, we're expanding our cooperation across the Arab region, especially on this point. So today we have over 100 projects, local country projects across the Arab region, focused on climate action and other parts of the environment agenda. Close to $1 billion of programming grant plus co-financing from public and private sectors and IFIs. So this is the UN's largest implementation of climate action in the Arab region, and enabling environment is the key part of that. So we're working at the upstream level primarily, working with governments and national companies also across the region on putting in place national energy transition policies, whether it's NREAPs and NEAPs, the National Renewable Energy and or Energy Efficient Action Plans, obviously enhancing the national climate plans, the NDCs over the last few years, and other national policies. Specifically, national strategies and policies for de-risking renewable energy investment. That's something that has been a good exercise in places like Tunisia and Lebanon, where we've helped do the analysis of how certain fiscal policies and other public policies can help to de-risk the market by investing in those measures, how it can reduce investor risk. And then establishing national plans, for example, the National Solar Plan in Tunisia, and then bringing together partners, including from different sectors, to implement those. I think financial mechanisms also is part of the enabling environment, and what we do across the region is actually to help also design and launch specific financial instruments. We've helped launch national funds, national solar funds. We've designed national solar funds and launched them in places like Sudan, for example, but also in Lebanon and elsewhere in the region. So dedicated domestic funds that can then serve as a platform for crowding in the finance that we're talking about and put it under this national governance arrangement. At the municipal level, also local, I should say, not just national, but also building the capacity of local actors, municipal governments, for example. In Morocco, for example, we're launching on the road to COP28 a new $300 million initiative, where we're, of course, mobilizing a 10 million of grant from global funds, but then another close to 300 million from national banks and from the private sector and from other partners, actually for scaling up climate finance for low carbon solutions at the municipal level in Morocco, but also helping to design local finance instruments, municipal green bonds, platforms for impact investors. Another important point briefly is on the role of domestic finance, meaning domestic national banks. And other sources of domestic finance, which is quite critical. I think more than 60% of countries in the MENA region, Arab region, are oil and gas economies. And so we're seeing lots expansion of public revenues and budgets. In Iraq, for example, we're working with the government on large-scale domestic lending program for scaling up renewable energy for local business. We're talking about also small and medium enterprises, which is, of course, the bulk of the economy in the MENA region as globally. And so to scale up their access to finance, actually, for the energy transition is really the base of the challenge in many ways, in many countries. So establishing an energy transition facility in a place like Iraq in concert with the central bank and other partners to actually channel some of this resources to some of the businesses at the local level that are keen to jump into the energy transition. And last, but definitely not least, is on capacity development for the new carbon market process that's emerging. Last year at COP27, we launched something called the Carbon Markets for Development facility. It's a new UNDP facility, one of the first, if I understand it, in the UN system to actually help countries on parts of Article 6 implementation. And it is really trying to generate carbon credits in developing countries that also have co-benefits for the SDGs and development goals. So how can the energy transition and scaled-up finance, not just for the sake of energy itself, and decarbonization in and of itself, but also address the serious challenges in the MENA region of poverty reduction, of combating inequality, and of course, stabilization and recovery from crisis as well.
Great, thank you very much. There's a lot in there.
Yes.
Starting from, and I think we have a theme, which is standardize, clear policy directions from the national policymakers, but then all the way to more specific examples of how we enable that through private sector, and even at a level that is not high level big projects, but also economy-wide transitions. For example, Iraq example to me is really fascinating, where yes, we often talk about large gigawatts of renewable energy, 1 or 2 or 3 projects, but transition to net zero is not going to happen just with those projects. So we need economy-wide transitions, and to have those economy-wide transitions, we need to enable the market at the very core of it, at the very local level. So thank you very much for sharing that. Let's go to RICRI. We've heard a lot about technologies in the MENA Climate Week this week. We've heard about new and upcoming technologies, green hydrogen. There's so much interest and momentum. There's carbon capture and storage, the circular carbon economy. Of course, the renewable energy, at least at a large scale, is a technology that is now becoming cost effective. But there's so much more in terms of the spectrum of technologies that the countries can consider. From your perspective, what are the most promising technologies that this region needs to focus on for net zero transitions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, when we think about the technologies and the promising technology to NDC, we need to think about 3 things. The technology is efficient, scalable, and easily deployable, that you can use it in several, I would say, not only sectors, but locations, regions, etc. And also the deployability related to the financial maturity, also not only the technological maturity. And if we got the lessons from the last 2 decades from renewable energy, we find that the key word was about modularity, which means that for solar PV, for example, we have now standard system that includes panel, inverters, storage batteries, if there is off-grid or hybrid systems, and that's all. Like you get in your car, you know that there is steering, you know the components, it's the same. And this is standardization, similar to the banking component, this modularity, we call it modularity in the technical side. This modularity helped to, in fact, promote the photovoltaic as a solution. And if you think about how deployable it is, you can install around 200 megawatt project in less than 6 months. So also it is fast. And you are not relying on the old technology. There is no moving parts. So the concept that we need to have machinery, heavy machinery, turbines, etc., is no longer part of the solution now. And it's easy to use. So this was for photovoltaic. You can apply this for the future also. Why we are now discussing, for example, and also you can compare. For example, the same solar domain. You can compare solar PV with CSP technology, concentrated solar power technology. In the Arab region, we have around 7,000 megawatt photovoltaic, but only 750 CSP, 10 folds. PV compared to CSP. And each project of the CSP technology, you can feel that it is customized and on its own. And if you look worldwide, you find the same, almost the same ratio, or even worse than that, because we could not reach what technology would be the prevailing technology. Would it be central tower receiver, for CSP I mean? Would it be parabolic troughs? Would it be Fresnel? Which technology would prevail? We are not sure yet, although parabolic trough has certain maturity. Towers are good also, but especially for the storage options, etc. When you think about this and take this, extend the line now. Extend the line for the modularity and so on. And you can figure out that we will continue in improving the efficiency of systems. Switch limit, we are not yet aware, but at least we are seeing this enhancement in the size and in the efficiency of photovoltaic. And we are seeing new materials being used. We are seeing innovations in the inverters that are now capable of dealing with grid stability issues. They are supporting now the stability rather than 2 years ago, only 2 years ago, that we were saying that photovoltaic cannot support the grid. Now this is changing. The hybrid mode is now easier, much easier. You can find double inverters. So for the technology side, we can rely on the advancement, the readiness of the technology to deploy. For wind, we are seeing higher height, bigger radiuses, higher capacity of generators. And when you think about this, I have been working for 30 years in this domain. And the first project we signed in Egypt was the largest scale, I mean, not the pilots, was around 20 megawatts. At that time, the largest capacity was around 660 kilowatt. The figure, I can't tell you the name. It was Vestas turbine. Now we are speaking commercially, onshore, not offshore, from 3 to 5 megawatts per turbine, and there are operational types, but not that much matured, around 8 megawatts. For the offshore, you get higher capacity than the 5. So also, instead of installing 10 turbines, you are now installing 1 turbine to produce higher energy even. So wind and solar are among the technologies that we see will continue in the coming 5, 10, even 20 years. 5, 10, even 20 years. We think about 2 things, green and blue, which are termed clean. And here you need to think about 2 aspects. First of all, innovation in grid flexibility issues to absorb the high amounts of renewable energy needed for both normal growth that Kishan highlighted too. More than 200 gigawatts are foreseen only by renewable energy target within the coming 10 years. So you need to innovate in the grid flexibility issue, how to deal with variable renewables, interconnection between countries, increasing the capacities, etc. But you need also to think about the electrolyzers, the readiness. The market yet is not yet on that giga scale. All the world is only 1 giga now, although Egypt is signing for 10 gigawatts. So the capacities in the supply side is somehow, and which technology, and we said this yesterday in the hydrogen panel, which technology should be there? Would it be alkaline technology, which has been practiced for several decades, or BAM? And BAM offers very nice concept from the technology perspective also. BAM is somehow like similar to the photovoltaic. You do not have moving parts. And this means that it can be scalable also. It can be modular. So would this work in the future? Other technologies, solid oxide, for example, other technologies are also underway. We are not sure yet which electrolyzer technology will take the market. Maybe all they coexist, we do not know. So this is another part of the technological part on the value chain. Promising, yes, but we need to look into. And if we think about the other side also, the liquefaction processes for hydrogen, or the adoption of natural gas pipelines to take part 5 to 6%, 10% maximum, as we know today, from hydrogen. All this, we are speaking just about green hydrogen. If you go to the blue, the carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology. And this is a huge domain of, and don't forget that we are a region that is hosting more than 1/4 of the natural gas reserves of the world. So we cannot sacrifice that and say we will only go to green hydrogen. As a region, it's a must that we go also for blue hydrogen at the beginning. And then green hydrogen will prevail. I'm sure of that because I'm a renewable energy expert. But we need a time for working together, blue and green, to create clean hydrogen economy. So these are another 2 tracks. A third track is digitization and using of artificial intelligence and smart technologies. And now we are seeing a wave among leading countries in the region towards installing smart cities, better livelihood for citizens, engaging the telecommunication with power generation, all aspects of life with health, care, etc. So this is an area, and I think the region would have also a competitive edge in that. We are ready for that. Another area which is typically abundant is energy efficiency in building. And I see this, in fact, we are in North Africa, we do not have enforced energy efficient building codes, for example.
Yeah.
And there are also some important technology. For example, I see also within the hydrogen economy, the possibility, but here we are on the demand side, not the supply side. The possibility of turning into EVs as the electric vehicles, providing that we are greening the network, so the electricity is green also. So this EV would be a transition toward net zero. But if the electricity is not greened, then there is no point of going to EVs for us. Right. But again, with the increased ratios of, or penetration ratios of renewable energy, electric vehicles would be among the technologies. But on the other hand, when I link this to hydrogen, the fuel cell technology. And the fuel cell technology would be very promising to, in fact, support long distance transportation technology, solar and wind, carbon capture utilization, storage technology, whether battery, pumped storage, flow batteries, etc., EVs, and efficient building, and possibly fuel cells, but we are not yet clear about this.
Thank you very much. This was very comprehensive, and there's so much, of course, decisions that both the market and the policymakers need to make. I don't want to oversimplify, but I'll just pick on one point, which is, to me, really, when I look at this region, the emissions intensity per capita is so high in so many countries, and it is really about using, not about using less energy, but it is using more energy more efficiently. And I think that's a huge opportunity in this region. Of course, there's an array of technologies, as you have very rightly described. Slight change of topic from technologies back into financing. CAPSARC has done a lot of work recently on investments and finance gaps. Could you describe a little bit of your perspective on what your research has found?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. It's a greatly timely, important topic that we're talking about. At CAPSARC researchers, we've been looking at various aspects of the investment gaps, and I'm not going to repeat that. My colleagues have already actually provided the global perspective. So let me just try to take it to a regional perspective. So our recent submission to Global Stocktake, looking at basically how much investment there needs to be in place as opposed to how much is actually happening. Everybody is simply lagging behind the globe. But if you look at cross-country, cross-region differences, actually the picture becomes little more difficult to deal with. Where basically in developed countries, we see they're lagging behind roughly 2 times. So where basically they need to increase their current investment levels by twice or 2.3 times. But if you come to regions like MENA, the current, for instance, the clean energy investment into power sector needs to go up by like 10 folds, 11 folds in sub-Saharan Africa, 14, 15 times. So, and we're not talking about a stock here, we're talking about a flow. Basically, what I'm talking about is achieving this every year until 2050. So basically, the investment gaps to reach Paris goals are gigantically high in the region. And when you look at the region's penetration of the sustainable finance flows, that's very limited. According to our calculations, on average, it's less than 1% of the global ESG debt market, which has been mentioned here, the green bonds, the sustainable bonds or loans. So there is a big gap in the investment. There's also a very big gap in the financing. So our study also looked at the potential reasons that could explain this. Why are we seeing such a big gap between the developing and the developed world? Well, obviously, the emerging theme of ESG or the sustainable finance requires a certain level of institutional capacity and development. For instance, we looked at countries' financial development performance as opposed to their penetration of the ESG funds. Up to a certain level of development, you don't actually scale things. So in order to get roughly 2 to 3% of your GDP type of flow, ESG flow into your country, you need to pass roughly the median financial development across the globe. This is the IMS Financial Development Index, for instance, that we are looking at. So why is that so? Mainly because ESG requires a lot of reporting, new collection of data, institutional capacity, as well as a lot of regulation and tracking. And there hasn't been much of that type happening, not just in the region, but in general in the developing countries. Carbon pricing, or in general, actually, carbon markets have been alluded towards as actually a saving boat for developing countries by usually World Bank. Our colleagues can comment on that, and IMF. That could be a very important source of finance for the energy transition investment. But even if, when you look at the carbon markets, implementation of it is rather difficult. I mean, not difficult, or requires a lot of prerequisites. You know, MRVs, certification, speaking to the global standards, that's all work in progress in many developing countries. Of course, there are initiatives. There has been initiatives made here by the Saudi authorities on the voluntary carbon markets in the kingdom, in the UAE, in other regions. But a lot of that is happening in the high-income countries in the region, where the situation is quite different than the rest of the MENA region. So another issue with the sort of the global ESG practices, when you think about them from the perspective of a developing country, particularly the region, there has been mention of hard debate sectors in the region. That's not just the oil and gas sector. There are other sectors, cement, steel sector. Well, current ESG practices, global practices, are not very much in favor of emerging technologies like CCUS. We had an early study collaborated with the Global CCS Institute that actually looking into the ESG frameworks, reporting guidelines, as well as the rating methodologies, simply showing that the investing into CCUS is not going to make you a super winner in these indices or frameworks. So you don't get much support from ESG finance, basically, if you want to invest into technologies like CCUS. But turns out that these technologies are particularly important for developing countries. Why is that so? Mainly because developing countries have structurally more carbon-intensive industries. You know, they don't produce Apple chips or things like high-tech products. They produce a lot of the simple, straightforward Kuznets curve argument that as you achieve a certain level of development, you actually tend to produce more carbon-intensive and less high-tech products. So we need more CCUS in developing countries, particularly in the region, but there is not much finance being upfront for it. I'm happy to take this forward. Maybe we'll talk about it. We also have been working on the circular carbon economy concept that's dear to Saudi Arabia, came out around the G20 leadership of Saudi Arabia in 2020, and where we researchers at the CAPSTARC have put out a CC index. We've been following roughly 64 countries globally, particularly the regional countries, very closely on various fronts, in terms of their penetration of clean technologies and the enabling environment. So that is probably going to come later, but just wanted to give you a trailer.
Yeah, hold that thought, I'll come back to you. But let's do another round and dig a little bit deeper into your first interventions, and perhaps briefly, if we can, just the interest of time. Back to IFC. Abdullah earlier touched on the massive needs and the critical need of enabling environment. Can we dig a little bit deeper into it? Put yourself in the purely a private sector company's shoes who has been asked to or is expected to finance green or transition technologies. What are some of the critical barriers that you think policymakers can address for you to feel comfortable, but that my investment will generate long-term sustainable results? Thanks.
Thank you, Adil, for this question. And I don't have to put myself in those shoes. We are in those shoes already because we finance these projects with our clients. So specifically on the renewable energy, there are three main challenges that we find in the region. One is weak institutional capacity to tender these projects, to design them, to administer them, to handle challenges that come either because of delays or cost overruns or what have you. So investments in building institutional capacity will be key towards moving faster in this space. The second is lack of scale. My fellow panelist mentioned modularity. That's applicable also in the financing packages, where you design a package that can be replicable, whereby you don't have to individually negotiate every contract, which would result in higher costs and even weaker negotiating power from the government side. And The last challenge is we face is poor credit utility off-taker. So a lot of the off-takers in emerging markets suffer from weak credit to guarantee payments for those power purchase agreements. So investing or reforming those utility off-takers would go a long way into making advances in this space. So this is focused specifically on the renewable energy. I think a lot of the other challenges were mentioned by different panelists in this discussion. I would like to mention two of them. One is reforming the enabling environment, either by introducing policy work that would promote not only cutting down or promoting renewable energy, but cutting down greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, a lot of countries have set targets for renewable energy generation as part of their energy mix, but it needs to go beyond that. The NDCs need to be very clear on what are the investable goals in each GHG section, and that will give clarity for the private sector and will promote more investments in that space. Creating carbon markets is very key, as mentioned just now. This would go a long way into allowing companies that save on carbon to sell those carbon credits to others that are unable to reduce their carbon emissions, and therefore entice more investment in that space. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage is a prime area for regulation and promotion in this region in particular. We've looked at, in the MENA region, to invest in large-scale CCUS projects, you need three key factors. One is a cluster of large emitters, which obviously is present in the region. Two, large storage capacities, which again is prevalent in the region with depleted reservoirs and saline basins. And third is proximity between the two, between the emission clusters and the storage space. Again, in this region, it's between 100 and 200 kilometers, which is very close. So this is a prime area for promoting investments in the CCUS space, and public policy should really promote investments in that area. I'll stop here.
Great, thank you very much for being brief, but still covering a lot of ground. Again, there's a lot in there: weak credit, need for modular financial products that can be easily replicated and scaled. Again, coming back to clear NDCs, clear targets in each sectors, clear pathways, so that private sector and all partners know where are we going and will we be supported for next 10, 15, 20 years. With that, let me come back to HSBC, again, from a banking sector perspective. Where do you think scale and growth could come from? And yeah, your perspective, please.
Yeah, so, there are a couple of things to touch on in terms of what's going to happen next, right? So within the COP process, COP26 was all about the financial sector, and we all really rallied to build coalitions around the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which looked at how to operationalize a net zero ambition, and how to do that by looking at financed emissions, i.e. taking accountability for the emissions associated with the lending that we provide and the capital market provision that we bring together. And we talked about mobilizing financial targets, so having a holistic approach so that there's something to aim for in terms of devoting capital. But what I think we'll see more of next is the labeled product space growing in an innovative way, but also banks working together to push that harder. And I just really wanted to bring this to light a little bit by showcasing a recent transaction that we've done in the region, which was the inaugural green bond issuance by Emirates NDB Bank, which happened a few weeks ago. And HSBC acted as the joint sustainability structuring agent, book runner, and lead manager. And why this is relevant is because it's a bank in this region that has a very specific focus in terms of its balance sheet exposure, a bank that's driven and developed its own sustainability financing framework, which has been endorsed by third-party opinion and endorsed by international investors. The book was marketed to Asia, Europe, US, as well as MENA. That demonstrates this appetite for the region and the appetite to really look closely at how sustainable finance frameworks are growing in region. So I suspect that we'll see a much more comprehensive approach from the banks here in driving that sustainable finance thinking collectively.
Great, thank you. Thank you for also sharing the green bond issuance example. We have seen more and more of that in this region, Morocco, Jordan, Egypt's green financing framework as well. And it's great to see that the global, regional, and then national banks are getting more involved in that. And of course, the need to have not just clear policies and emission reduction targets or sectoral pathways, but complemented by financial targets so that the banking sector feels included in that process as well. Back to UNDP. The other dimension of net zero transitions in this region is that we have a number of countries that face crisis situations. They are fiscally constrained, their political economy is just complex, they have competing development priorities. How do you see net zero transition will work in those contexts, and what can policymakers again do to establish more reliable enabling environment so that while all of this political complexity is being addressed, these countries are still moving in the right direction?
Yeah, it's a very important point. I mean, we've seen some of the world's fastest growth rates in poverty in the MENA region over the last decade, driven by situations of crisis, conflict, displacement, and therefore an expansion of energy poverty as well for a large section of the population of the MENA region. So the energy transition from a development perspective and from a resilience perspective is also about how the energy transition and scaled-up finance actually helps close the energy gap for poor and displaced communities. So yes, over the last decade, we've seen a significant scale-up of energy finance and renewable energy and energy efficiency results in places like Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, KSA, UAE, and other countries. But of course, we also have serious energy transition and energy gaps in places like Lebanon, Palestine, Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. So this is so for this half of the region, it's as you say a different set of drivers and challenges. So as the UN Development Program, we've been working over the last decade in all of these contexts. We have local offices in all of these contexts and all of the other countries in the region. And our expansion over the last decade of programming on energy transition for crisis, for stabilization of communities and for recovery. The establishment of dedicated UN trust funds actually to help with crisis response and recovery in many of these countries. And a significant important component of that is then also on the energy element. So just to give you a few examples, for example, in Yemen, we have a very successful innovative program of the last decade on expansion of solar solutions for powering schools, clinics, irrigation for many of the displaced communities, so that you know, to address expanding levels of disease, food insecurity, and the stabilization and recovery of livelihoods, basic dignity and livelihoods for communities. Same in Lebanon, an expansion over the last number of years of our energy programming, low carbon solar solutions, decentralized solutions in a way that can really help stabilize power access for SMEs, again, for social services such as schools and clinics. And in many of these, and in Palestine and West Bank, actually, very, very significant progress over the last decade in terms of uptake of renewable energy as well, and other parts of the region. So this is a critical element of the energy transition for MENA specifically, is to see how we can scale up measures, technologies, finance, et cetera, in a way that doesn't leave anybody behind. And this is critical for the region so that this gulf between the haves and have-not in the region doesn't continue to expand as it, of course, is. And I think that there's a significant role not just for grants, and which it's largely focusing on grants and humanitarian assistance, but also there's very important cases of bringing in the role of the private sector and IFIs as well. So we're working very closely, not just with the World Bank and KfW and other large MDBs, but also with private sector partners that want to actually you know, do the same, expand their role in the energy transition in a way that can help communities of the region combat poverty and recovery from crisis. Another very specific example, through this process, we also launched over the last few years the first waste-to-energy facility, for example, in Yemen, through partnerships with the private sector and this large-scale financing. Same thing in other contexts, such as in Lebanon and elsewhere, Somalia and Sudan, where there's very innovative solutions coming out of necessity. Sometimes crisis brings out interesting outcomes out of necessity to reduce future dependence on energy imports and to be able to integrate low-carbon solutions into reconstruction and build back from crisis.
Thank you very much. In fact, on just very, very quickly reflecting on your last point, energy security is critical for this region, but then also for countries that are undergoing crisis situations, building domestic renewable energy in a modular, small and medium scale industries and markets will actually bring in more energy security despite the global and regional political challenges. So thank you very much. I'm cautious of
investment. Also, countries can enhance their partnerships to share knowledge, technical expertise, and also experience in implementing renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. Also to benefit from the existing international partnerships, for example, from the leader countries in implementing renewable energy technologies like Germany and China and other countries. In addition to that, to invest in the research and development. This include innovations in storage and EV and renewable energy and energy efficiency in general. In addition to that, also, which is key, is to explore the financing options, whether from the national budgets or from the international or regional financial institutions, and also the institutional capacities, as our colleagues they mentioned. There is a need to enhance the institutional capacities and also to build the skills, the local skills by providing trainings and improve the capacities for engineers, technicians, and also policymakers to, for example, to train them to how to develop the regulations and laws and also in managing the projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, knowledge, capacity, skills are critical when you transfer technologies from one part of the world to the others. Dr. Fatih, you have a challenging task of summarizing some of what you were going to continue on CCUS and some of the issues and challenges that you see from your research, but in a very, very limited time. Maybe 1 minute, please.
Sure. Well, so back to the little trailer that I made earlier, the circular carbon economy concept and the index that we've been following through. We've been following 64 countries globally as well as the region. Well, let me just do a 1-minute sum of the regional conclusions. Mm-hmm. Well, the region is quite heterogeneous. You have high-income GCC, resource-rich GCC countries. They have different development levels than the rest of the MENA region. So they face different types of issues, and the solution mechanisms that you're going to involve are going to be definitely different. So thinking from the perspective of addressing the investment gaps and financing gaps, obviously the GCC economies have a well-established position, given their wealthy sovereign wealth funds and the more developed financial institutions and integration to the rest of the world. However, there is definitely on the way going forward, there's definitely going to be more and more needs of private finance, because this is $1 trillion or trillions of dollars of journey that we're talking about. Turning to the relatively middle income and low income MENA countries, obviously there is going to be some early needs of financial support in the form of potentially concessional finance or blended finance, but let's just be frank, the size of these options, they're extremely important. They can definitely seed and bring more interest from the private investors and financiers, But in the long run, to address the issue, we definitely need a more long-term solution where basically the local institutions need to incur this financial development to bring more private finance from the global markets. So last word, there's definitely potential for a lot of regional cooperation, and there's a lot of it is currently happening. There's EpiCorp, there's the CCE fund coming along, and there's a lot of investments, for instance, from the PIF in the rest of the region. However, for a long-term solution, if we want the emerging sustainable finance to be the solution, not actually a barrier for developing countries, one definitely needs to develop the local institutional and regulatory framework. That was probably a little more than 1 minute, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, just maybe one example of how, when I think about how diverse this region is, from North Africa all the way to GCC, with so many differences around financial sector, around banking sector, around technologies, around levels of poverty. Just on carbon markets, because we couldn't go into the details, I also personally feel like carbon markets could be an important source of financing that this region needs. And this region doesn't necessarily need bilateral transactions with other global partners. This region can do a lot within itself in bringing in financing from one part of the region to another part of the region to enable these transitions. Thank you all very much. I really learned a lot from this session. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. Let's close this session with a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.